Russian troops mass on the border with Ukraine. Will they back down? Or will they invade? And could this start a much bigger war? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Russia has stationed somewhere around 120,000 troops along its border with Ukraine. Shelley, I think this is an old script. Isn't this back from April? Oh, it's happening again. Gotcha. I prefer reruns of Seinfeld. But sure, reruns of Impending Doom are also fun to watch while on the treadmill. Is my heart rate high because I'm running or because I'm terrified? Either way, it's cardio. Yeah, so Russian troops have massed on Russia's border with Ukraine. Again, back in April, the Russians had amassed over 120,000 troops on the border with Ukraine. And that sparked fears that Russia might invade. But then they didn't. The troops withdrew. What happened? Did someone say Putin's name in the mirror 5 times and that summoned him elsewhere? The Russian defense minister said that the amassed troops were just part of readiness drills as a response to threats from NATO. That's not a great excuse. That'd be like telling a cop, "No, officer, I wasn't mugging him. I only pointed my gun as part of a readiness drill." Either way, crisis averted. Conflict over. Or so it seemed. Except that Russia promised it would be back. The troops left, but the defense minister told them to leave their heavy weapons behind for another exercise later this year. They just left their weapons behind? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Until the US did the exact same thing in Afghanistan a few months later. Happy early Christmas, Taliban. Fast forward 8 months. And now, as of December 9th, Ukraine said Russia had put 120,000 troops on the border. Again. That's about 12% of Russia's military personnel. The buildup has some concern this situation might be less like what happened back in April, when the Russian troops eventually left, and more like what happened in 2014. And no, I'm not talking about Kim and Kanye's wedding. R.I.P. Kimye. We covered what happened in 2014 in our episode in April. But here's a quick recap. In 2014, mass protests erupted in Ukraine against the corrupt President Viktor Yanukovych after he refused to sign a political and trade agreement with the European Union. These so-called Euromaidan protests ultimately resulted in Yanukovych being ousted. Taking advantage of the chaos, Russia stationed troops on the border with Ukraine before occupying the Crimean Peninsula. This was followed shortly by a referendum to see whether the citizens of Crimea wanted to join Russia. Reportedly, 97% said yes, although not everyone believed this number. I don't know why. The person reporting this number seemed so trustworthy. At about the same time, a pro-Russian separatist uprising popped up in Ukraine's eastern Donbas region. That fighting is still underway, with about 14,000 Ukrainian casualties since 2014, which had absolutely nothing to do with Russia, they swear. At the time, Ukraine and the West accused Russia of sending troops and weapons to back the rebels, but Moscow claimed that any Russians who joined the separatists were volunteers. Yeah, those weapons that went to the separatists and all came with cards saying "From Russia with love" could have come from anyone. So in 2014, Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine, and the Donbas region of Ukraine became occupied by pro-Russian separatist rebels who are still there. In April of this year, Russian troops amassed along the border with Ukraine, sparking fears Russia was back to gobble up more of Ukraine. But instead, after a while, they left. They just left a bunch of heavy weaponry behind, which seems like a terrible idea to everyone except Joe Biden, that is. And now, once again, there are Russian troops on the Ukrainian border. And there are concerns that there might be a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Deja vu. A glitch in the Matrix? Just kidding. Russia doing something nefarious just means it's probably Thursday. But what is everyone so worried about? Why do they think this is more likely to be like the annexation of Crimea in 2014 rather than the buildup and drawdown that happened earlier this year? We'll get into that after the break. Welcome back, assuming you went anywhere. Historically, tensions between the West and Russia on the border with Ukraine have often been higher than Snoop Dogg taking a hot air balloon tour of Denver. And yet, not much came of it in April. But some are saying it will be different this time. For one, Putin wants more territory, and he'll fish for it, or hunt for it if he has to. He won't put a shirt on for it, though. Also, he published an essay in July that specifically outlines his view on Ukraine. The title was On the Historical Unity of Russians and Ukrainians, which pretty much tells you everything you need to know. In the essay, Putin argues that Ukraine is a historical part of Russia, and that Ukraine's status as an independent nation is simply a result of outside forces trying to divide and rule. Is it just me, or does that sound like a high schooler writing emo song lyrics? Russia has never felt more cold than when you left me, Ukraine. And yes, there have been times in history when Ukraine was part of Russia. But Ukraine has been independent since the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. And if the idea that a region that once briefly was part of your territory always belongs to you sounds familiar, we heard it from this guy. And this guy. Of course, some have argued that Putin's essay is just propaganda aimed at distracting the Russian public from pandemic woes. And Putin is pretty good at propaganda. Remember this? If this is the first time you heard that, you're welcome. Also, the only reason Putin doesn't drink is because you have to assume every liquid in Moscow is poison. He only consumes powdered water. Where was I? Oh, right. Putin wants to invade Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian president says his intelligence community discovered and thwarted a coup plot against him that was to be enacted on December 2nd. And the Ukraine Defense Intelligence Agency chief says that there's evidence Russia is preparing to attack Ukraine by late January. Of course, if all that intelligence was just coming from Ukraine, that would be one thing. Everyone knows Ukraine doesn't want to be invaded by Russia. I mean, they would say anything, right? They'd even say that an invasion of Ukraine could trigger World War III. But it turns out the United States has similar intelligence. Wow. And here I thought World War III was going to be started by pineapple on pizza. People are very opinionated over this. Meanwhile, a recent Russian court document mentioned Russian troops stationed in eastern Ukraine, before the document mysteriously disappeared from the internet, like this photo of Beyoncé performing at the Super Bowl. For a little while, nothing stays disappeared on the internet forever. Moscow said that there are no Russian troops in eastern Ukraine and that the information on the document was a mistake, before the writer of that document mysteriously disappeared. Okay, we don't actually know if that last part is true, but probably. I hope they were drinking powdered water. Whatever may happen, I'm sure the writer of that document agrees that writing it was a mistake. I guess I can see why the world might be a bit on edge about what Russia is doing. The question is, what is Russia doing exactly? On November 17th, United States Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said, "We're not sure exactly what Mr. Putin is up to. And certainly Putin does know how to keep the world guessing. If there's one thing we can give Putin credit for, it's his poker face. And his poker chest." With all this brewing, on December 7th, Biden and Putin met face-to-face for the first time since the summit in June. And by face-to-face, I mean they had a video call. It's the 2021 version of face-to-face. Some say that how Biden handles this situation will be a true test of America's credibility abroad, which we could use some more of ever since debuting young Sheldon. We lost a lot of respect around the world for that one, and if we didn't, we should have. So how is Biden handling the situation? I'll get to that after the break. Welcome back. How is President Biden handling Putin's aggression? He's taking a strong stance against Putin. Before the meeting, Biden made it clear he wasn't about to let Russia get away with anything, saying the U.S. will send troops to Eastern Europe if Russia invades Ukraine. Hopefully they won't just leave their equipment there this time. And during the meeting, Biden warned Putin of a strong response if Russia invades Ukraine. And he's not alone. The UK also seemed prepared to aid Ukraine. Why does that sound eerily familiar? Back in 2014, Obama threatened sanctions if Russia invaded Ukraine, and he stayed true to his word. Those sanctions just didn't accomplish much since, Russia still invaded Crimea. It wasn't much of a threat. It was like telling a kid, hey, you're not going to get your allowance if you rob that bank, mister. This time around, the G7 is absolutely unified over the consequences if Russia invades Ukraine. And it's ready to implement new sanctions that hadn't been tried in 2014. But what those sanctions could look like is not entirely clear. Some have suggested that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline could be sanctioned. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline is completed and ready to begin funneling natural gas from Russia to Western Europe. However, it is still awaiting a green light from Germany, so it isn't functional yet. Germany, of course, is probably relieved that if the situation does go south, they won't be the ones to cause a world war for once. Some are urging NATO and Biden to keep pipeline sanctions on the table as an option. But Biden isn't so sure. And frankly, neither is Germany. The problem is that even though the pipeline isn't functional yet, it was going to be soon. So sanctions on the pipeline would affect Western Europe just as much as Russia. And Western Europe is currently experiencing an energy crisis. They'd be punishing themselves to punish Russia. This is like telling a kid, hey, I'm going to rip up my own paycheck if you rob that bank, mister. Another option that has been suggested is cutting Russia off from the SWIFT banking system, which is how many countries enact trades with each other. This has been called the nuclear option. Considering all this talk of World War III, I'm glad cutting a country out of a banking system is what's being called the nuclear option. But it, along with other lesser banking sanctions, seem to be on the table. Biden communicated the consequences if Russia invades Ukraine to Putin during their video call on December 7th. But it doesn't look like Russia is backing down. Wow. I can't believe the guy on the left wasn't able to intimidate the Adonis on the right. On December 17th, Russia released a draft treaty in which it demanded that NATO and the United States deny Ukraine membership and roll back military deployments in eastern NATO countries. Russia also demanded that NATO agree not to expand any farther eastward, which is to say that Ukraine isn't the only country on the no membership allowed list, as far as Russia is concerned. NATO has been slowly gaining members over the years since its inception in 1949. With North Macedonia the newest member in 2020. And Russia sees this as an act of aggression on the part of the West, even though every country that joined NATO did so after asking to join NATO. That's like saying that some guy stole your girlfriend even though she asked him out, and you never actually dated her in the first place. Quit being such a beta, Russia. Ukraine first asked to become a member of NATO in 2008 and has desired membership solidly since 2014. I wonder why. But NATO has repeatedly denied Ukraine membership, citing corruption as the reason. It could be corruption, or it could be the fact that everyone knows admitting Ukraine would anger the Russians. And whether it's Putin or even the teens that hang out at the bodega near my place, you do not want to anger the Russians. Sorry for calling you a beta a few seconds ago. But while NATO hasn't rushed to let Ukraine into NATO, they weren't exactly thrilled with the idea of Putin calling the shots either. They have signaled their willingness to support Ukraine, just not in the ways they would a full NATO member. And NATO's Secretary General almost immediately rejected Russia's demands, keeping the option of admitting Ukraine open. Poor Ukraine. NATO is telling them they just want to keep it casual and not get into anything too serious. Russia, of course, promptly punched back. During the video call on December 7th, Biden asked Russia to de-escalate and resume peace talks with Ukraine, but none of this is sounding much like de-escalation. And if all that weren't bad enough, there are signs that Russia and China are friendlier than ever. So maybe Ukraine isn't actually being alarmist when they say that an invasion of Ukraine could lead to World War III. Or maybe all of the Russian troops will leave in a week. You just never know what Putin will do next. So what do you think? Is Russia going to invade Ukraine? Let us know in the comments. And remember, since YouTube keeps demonetizing us, America Uncovered is supported primarily by viewers. So please visit our Patreon page and contribute $1 or more per episode to help keep great content coming. I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.